I never meant to say it. The word just slipped out, soft and broken, like something that had been buried so deep inside me that I'd forgotten it was even there. Mom. 1 syllable. 4 letters. A lifetime of longing compressed into a single breath that I released into the phone, speaking to a woman whose number I'd found scribbled on a piece of paper tucked inside an old photo album I'd discovered in my grandmother's attic just 3 weeks earlier. The silence that followed felt like falling. I stood frozen in my apartment, phone pressed tight against my ear, waiting for her to hang up. I was waiting for the click that would confirm what I'd always suspected about myself, that I was still that unwanted child. Still searching for something that was never really mine to find in the first place. But she didn't hang up. Instead, she drew in a sharp breath, the kind that catches in your throat when you've just seen a ghost, and then she whispered my name. My full name. The one that appeared on my original birth certificate. The one I'd never told anyone because even I had only learned it 2 months ago, when I finally worked up the courage to request my sealed adoption records. Emma Rose, she said, and her voice cracked on both words, splintering into something raw and ancient. Emma Rose, is that really you? I couldn't breathe. The walls of my small apartment seemed to close in around me. The afternoon light filtering through my curtains was suddenly too bright, too real. Too present for this moment that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. How could she know my name? How could she recognize my voice when we'd never spoken before? When I'd been only 3 days old the last time she'd held me. My childhood had been good, or at least that's what I always told myself. The Harrisons adopted me when I was 6 months old, and they loved me the way parents are supposed to love their children. They read me bedtime stories and came to every single school play. They taught me how to ride a bike and held me when I cried. But there was always something missing, some invisible wound that never quite healed. I'd catch myself staring at strangers in grocery stores, wondering if they could be related to me, searching for my eyes in their faces, my smile in their expressions. I'd watch mothers and daughters shopping together, laughing at inside jokes, and feel this hollow ache in my chest that had no name. When I was 7, I asked my mom, my adoptive mom, Sarah, why my birth mother had given me away. We were sitting in our backyard, and she was braiding my hair, her fingers gentle and patient as they worked through the tangles. She paused for a long moment, and I could feel her trying to choose just the right words, words that would soothe rather than wound me. Sometimes, she said finally, people love someone so much that they have to let them go. Your birth mother wanted you to have a life she couldn't give you. That doesn't mean she didn't love you. Sometimes it means the exact opposite. I'd nodded like I understood, but I didn't, not really, because if she'd loved me, wouldn't she have kept me? Wouldn't she have found a way? These questions followed me through childhood and adolescence and right into adulthood. They were shapeless and persistent, coloring everything I did with a peculiar kind of sadness that I learned to hide behind. Smiles and small talk and the appearance of always being fine. Sarah died 2 years ago, and my adoptive father, Michael, had passed when I was 19. Grief has a way of making you brave, or maybe just desperate. With both of them gone, the questions I'd been too afraid to ask out loud suddenly demanded answers. I needed to know where I came from. I needed to understand the woman who had carried me for 9 months and then handed me to strangers. I needed to know if she ever thought about me, if she ever wondered who I'd become, if she ever regretted her choice. The adoption records arrived on a Tuesday in September. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, and I poured myself a glass of wine even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. The documents were clinical, sparse, filled with dates and signatures and legal language that reduced the most profound moment of my life to a bureaucratic procedure. But there were details, too. Her name, Catherine Ann Morrison. Her age at my birth, 16. And a single line in the social worker's notes that made my throat tighten. Birth mother extremely distressed at separation. Required sedation. I read that line over and over again, trying to picture her, trying to imagine what it must have felt like to be 16 and alone, and making an impossible choice. Had she cried? Had anyone held her? Did she know even then that she'd spend the rest of her life carrying the weight of that goodbye? The phone number wasn't in the official records. I found it weeks later while sorting through boxes in my grandmother's attic. Sarah's mother had kept everything: old tax returns, birthday cards, receipts from 30 years ago. And among all that clutter, I discovered a photo album I'd never seen before. Tucked between pages showing my first birthday and my first Christmas was a small piece of notepaper with a phone number and the name Catherine written in Sarah's careful handwriting. There was a date on it too, 2 years after my adoption. Had they stayed in contact? Had my mother known things about my birth mother that she'd never told me? I stared at that number for 3 whole days, the paper growing soft and creased from how many times I folded and unfolded it. What would I say? What do you say to the woman who gave you life and then gave you away? Every imagined conversation felt wrong, too angry or too desperate or just too needy. But this morning, I'd woken up with the kind of clarity that comes from finally accepting that you're going to do something, regardless of how terrified you are. I dialed the number expecting nothing. Maybe it would be disconnected. Maybe it would belong to someone else by now. Maybe she'd moved on, built a new life, buried the past so deep that she wouldn't want me digging it up again. I'd even rehearsed a careful introduction, neutral and polite, asking if she was Catherine Morrison, explaining who I was without demanding anything from her. But then I heard her voice say hello, and something inside me just broke open. All my carefully planned words dissolved, and instead, this raw, unguarded need came pouring out. And now, hearing her say my name, a name she'd given me but never got to use, I realized this wasn't an ending but a beginning. What happens next? I don't know, but for the first time, I'm not afraid to find out. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever felt that pull to understand your own past, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button and follow along on this journey with me. It was my voice, but not my voice. It sounded like a little girl, a voice I didn't even recognize as my own, saying the one word I'd never been allowed to say to her, Mom. And just like that, there we were. Both of us just breathing into the phone, separated by miles and decades and decisions neither of us had been old enough to understand. We were connected by blood and grief and the unmistakable sound of recognition in her silence. How did you know? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. How did you know it was me? She was crying now. I could hear it in the way her breath hitched, in the small, suppressed sounds she was trying to hold back. And it made something twist painfully in my chest. For 28 years, I had pictured this woman as someone distant, someone unknowable, someone who had made her choice and simply moved on. But the sound of her crying, it made her real in a way that all my research and imagination never could. I've been waiting for this call my entire life, she said, each word sounding like it was being pulled from somewhere deep and protected. Every single time my phone rings, some part of me hopes it's you. Every birthday, every Mother's Day, every random Tuesday afternoon. I've imagined this conversation so many times that I thought I'd know exactly what to say. But now I can't remember any of it. I sank down onto my couch, my legs suddenly unable to hold me up. But my voice, I pressed. How could you possibly recognize my voice after all this time? I recorded you, she said softly, when you were born. The hospital let me keep you for 3 days before the adoption was finalized. And I spent almost every minute of those 3 days just talking to you, singing to you, memorizing everything about you. Your little fingers, the way you scrunched up your face when you were hungry, the tiny little sounds you made. On the last day, I borrowed a tape recorder from one of the nurses. I recorded myself singing you a lullaby, and I recorded you crying. And I recorded myself telling you all the things I wanted you to know but was too afraid to write down in a letter you might never read. My hand flew to my mouth, trying to hold back a sob. You kept the recording? I've listened to it 10,000 times, she said. I know every breath, every sound you made. And your voice now, it's different, of course, it's different. You're a grown woman. But there's something underneath, something in the cadence or the tone. The moment you said that word, the moment you called me Mom, I heard my baby girl. I heard you. The apartment was so quiet except for the sound of both of us crying. Two strangers who weren't strangers at all, separated by a continent but connected by something that had survived 28 years of complete silence. I tried to picture her, this woman who had been little more than a child herself when she'd made the hardest decision of her life. Was she sitting or standing? Was she alone? Did she have other children, brothers and sisters I'd never met? So many questions flooded my mind. Why didn't you try to find me? The question came out before I could stop it, edged with an anger I didn't even know I'd been carrying. If you wanted to hear from me so badly, why didn't you look for me? The silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt different, heavier. It was thick with things that needed to be said but had been locked away for far too long. "Because I was afraid," she finally answered, and her raw honesty cut through my anger like a light through darkness. "I was afraid you'd hate me. I was afraid your parents wouldn't want me disrupting your life. I was afraid you'd look at me and see someone who abandoned you, someone who didn't fight hard enough to keep you." The adoption was supposed to be closed, completely sealed, and I respected that because I thought it was what was best for you. She took a shaky breath. "But Sarah, your mom, your real mom, she reached out to me 2 years after the adoption was finalized." My breath caught in my throat. "She did?" "She sent me a letter with that phone number," Catherine continued. "She said she wanted me to know that you were happy and healthy, that you were loved. She sent pictures every year on your birthday. Not through official channels, just between us. She said she thought it was important for me to watch you grow up, even if it was from a distance. And she said that if you ever wanted to find me when you were older, she would make sure you had the information you needed." Tears were streaming down my face now as I thought about Sarah, my mom. About all the secrets she'd kept to protect me. To protect both of us. She'd never told me about those letters, those pictures, that private correspondence with the woman who had given birth to me. She carried that knowledge all alone, building a bridge between my two mothers without either of them ever having to cross it. She was holding that door open for the day when I might be ready to walk through it myself. "She sent you pictures of me?" I asked, my voice breaking on the question. "Every single year," Catherine said, her own voice thick with emotion. "You in a high chair with birthday cake all over your face when you turned 1. You dressed as a butterfly for Halloween when you were 4. You at your middle school graduation, you in your prom dress, you at college orientation. The last one arrived 3 months before she died. You were at some kind of outdoor concert, smiling at whoever was taking the picture. And she wrote on the back, 'She has your smile, you know. She's always had your smile.' I couldn't speak. I could barely even breathe. All those years I'd thought I was searching alone, carrying my questions in complete isolation. But my mom, Sarah, had been there all along, quietly building this bridge, keeping this door open, honoring both the mother who raised me and the mother who gave me life. She had understood something I was only just beginning to grasp, that love isn't a finite resource. That there was room in my life and in my heart for both of them. That finding Catherine wouldn't erase Sarah, but would instead complete something that had been broken in me since the very beginning. My two mothers, one who gave me life and one who gave me a life, had been connected all along by a quiet pact of love. A love so profound it crossed decades and distance. Sarah's secret wasn't a betrayal. It was the ultimate gift. It was the gift of choice, the gift of connection, the gift of a future where I wouldn't have to choose between the two women who made me who I am. In that moment, through tears and a shared history, I was only just discovering. I felt whole for the first time. The puzzle of my past wasn't missing a piece. It just had 2 pieces that finally fit together. And I knew, in that profound silence filled with shared tears, that this was not an ending, but a new beginning. A beginning made possible by the incredible love of 2 mothers, a whispered promise on an old cassette tape, and a secret kept for 28 years, all for me. I had a long road ahead, so much to learn and understand. But I wouldn't be walking it alone. I had a mother waiting on the other end of the line, a mother who had never stopped waiting. And I had the enduring love of the mother who had made sure we would one day find our way back to each other. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the heart. See you next time. "I need to meet you," I said suddenly, the words tumbling out, urgent and essential. "I need to see you. I need to understand. Where do you live?" "I'm in Portland," she said. "I've been here since you were born. I couldn't leave, couldn't go far because I always hoped that somehow, someday, you might come looking for me and I wanted to be where you could find me." "I'm in Seattle," I said, my mind already racing, already planning. "That's only 3 hours away. I could drive down this weekend. We could meet somewhere, maybe for coffee or—" "Come to my house," she interrupted gently. "Please, I want you to see where I live. I want you to see the room I kept for you." My heart stuttered. "The room you kept for me?" "It's silly, I know," she said, and I could hear embarrassment creeping into her voice. But I couldn't help it. When I finally got my own place, I set aside one bedroom and I filled it with things I thought you might like. Books I loved when I was young, a quilt my grandmother made, pictures from your childhood that Sarah sent me. It's like a shrine to a daughter I couldn't raise. And I'm probably going to regret telling you about it because it sounds completely crazy, but I'm done hiding. If you're brave enough to call me, I can be brave enough to let you see all of it, even the crazy parts. I was crying again, but this time there was something else mixed in with the tears, something that felt like relief, like coming home to a place I'd never been. That doesn't sound crazy, I whispered. That sounds like love. We talked for another hour, the conversation meandering through safer territory. She told me she worked as a librarian, which made me laugh because I was a teacher, and we'd both chosen professions surrounded by books and learning in quiet spaces. She told me she'd never married, never had other children, though she'd come close a few times. She asked me careful questions about my life, and I could hear her trying not to be greedy, trying not to demand too much too fast, but I wanted to give her everything. I told her about my job teaching second grade, about my small apartment and my cat named Hemingway, about the way I loved thunderstorms and hated pickles and cried at every movie, even the comedies. As we spoke, I kept waiting for the conversation to feel awkward or forced, but it didn't. It felt like finding a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing. Like discovering that I'd been speaking a language my whole life without knowing half the words, and now someone was teaching me the rest of the vocabulary. We made plans to meet that Saturday in 3 days, and by the time we finally said goodbye, my voice was hoarse from crying and talking and laughing. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, not bothering to turn on the lights, just holding my phone and letting the weight of what had just happened settle over me. Somewhere in Portland, Catherine was probably doing the same thing. Both of us suspended in this moment between the past and whatever came next. The next 3 days moved with a strange, dreamlike quality, time stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. I called in sick to work on Friday, unable to imagine standing in front of 23 7-year-olds and pretending everything was normal when my entire world had tilted on its axis. I spent hours going through old photo albums, seeing my childhood through new eyes, looking for traces of Catherine in my face, in my expressions. My adoptive mom, Sarah, had been blonde and fair-skinned, while I had dark hair and olive skin that tanned easily in summer. I'd always assumed I got those features from my birth father, whoever he was, but now I wondered how much of Catherine I carried in my bones and blood. On Friday night, I stood in front of my closet for 40 minutes, trying to decide what you wear to meet your birth mother for the first time. Everything felt wrong, too casual, too formal, trying too hard, not trying hard enough. I finally settled on jeans and a soft blue sweater that Sarah had always said brought out my eyes, and I told myself that she would have wanted me to wear something that made me feel like myself, something that carried a piece of her with me into this meeting. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind spun through scenarios, imagining what it would be like to see Catherine in person, to hug her, to sit across from her and try to build a relationship from nothing but biology and longing. What if we had nothing to talk about in person? What if the easy connection we'd found on the phone evaporated in the awkward reality of face-to-face conversation? What if I looked at her and felt nothing, or worse, felt everything but couldn't find the words to express it? Saturday morning arrived wrapped in rain, the kind of steady Pacific Northwest drizzle that turned the world soft and gray. I left Seattle at 8, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my heart hammering against my ribs with every mile that brought me closer to Portland. The drive took me through familiar territory past Olympia, past Centralia, through Longview, but everything looked different now. Charged with significance, as if the landscape itself understood that I was traveling towards something that would change me forever. I arrived at Catherine's address at 11:15. Parking my car across the street from a small craftsman-style house, painted sage green with white trim and a garden full of roses that must have been spectacular before autumn stripped away most of their blooms. The house looked warm and lived in, with a wind chime on the porch and a welcome mat shaped like a sunflower. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, trying to steady my breathing, trying to prepare myself for whatever happened next. Then the front door opened and she was there. Catherine stepped onto the porch slowly, as if she was as afraid as I was, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the rain-soaked distance. She was smaller than I'd imagined, barely 5'3", with dark hair cut short and threaded with gray-wearing jeans and a burgundy cardigan, and an expression that held so much hope and fear that it made my chest ache. But it was her eyes that undid me, dark brown, the same shade as mine, with the same slightly downturned shape that made us look sad even when we were happy. In that single, breathtaking moment, I saw a reflection of myself I never knew existed. Years of questions, of wondering, of feeling a piece of myself missing, all led to this porch, to this woman who shared my eyes. This was more than just a meeting, it was a homecoming. And as I finally opened my car door to step out into the rain, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that my life would never be the same. The journey to find her was over, but the journey to know her was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing. It means the world to me. See you next time. I scrambled out of the car, completely forgetting my umbrella, forgetting to lock the doors, forgetting everything except the urgent need to close the space between us. She was coming down the porch steps, her pace quickening, and then, just like that, we were standing 2 feet apart in the pouring rain. We were both crying before a single word was spoken. "Emma," she breathed. Hearing my name in her voice, in person, felt even more overwhelming than it had on the phone. "Oh, Emma, look at you. Look at who you became." I couldn't hold back anymore. All my fears about moving too fast, about being too much, just evaporated. I threw my arms around her. She held me with a strength that felt like she'd been waiting 28 years for this exact moment. She was warm, solid, real. She smelled like lavender and old books. I could feel her shaking as she clutched me. This stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. This woman who was the first person to ever hold me, now holding me again for the first time in nearly 3 decades. We just stood there in the rain, holding on, crying, letting all those years of separation and longing pour out of us. When we finally pulled apart, we were both laughing and wiping at our faces. She cupped my cheek, her thumb brushing away my tears even as her own kept falling. "You're getting soaked," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Come inside, please. Come inside and let me look at you properly." Her house was everything I'd imagined a librarian's home to be. It was filled with bookshelves, comfortable furniture, and soft lighting that made the whole place feel safe and quiet. We stood in the entryway, dripping all over her hardwood floors. She grabbed towels from a closet, and we both tried to dry off, stealing glances at each other, almost afraid the other might vanish if we looked away for too long. "I made tea," she said nervously, gesturing to the kitchen. "Or coffee if you'd rather. And I baked banana bread this morning. It's probably terrible. I was so nervous I could barely follow the recipe. I just needed something to do with my hands or I was going to lose my mind." "Tea sounds perfect," I said, my voice still shaky. I followed her into a cheerful yellow kitchen with herb plants on the windowsill. "And I love banana bread." We settled at her kitchen table with steaming mugs and thick slices of bread that was, despite her worries, absolutely delicious. For a few minutes, we just sat in a comfortable silence, sipping tea, stealing glances, and trying to navigate this strange new reality. How do you act around someone you've known your entire life but have never actually met? "I have so many questions," I finally said, setting my mug down. "I don't even know where to start." "Ask me anything," Catherine said immediately. "I've been waiting 28 years to answer your questions. I won't hide anything from you, I promise." "Not anymore." So I asked, and she answered. She told me everything. About being 15 when she got pregnant. About how my biological father, who was 17 and terrified, left town the moment he found out. She told me about her parents, my grandparents' kind, working-class people who just didn't have the resources to help her raise a baby. She talked about her pregnancy, how she hid it for as long as she could, determined to keep me. Until a social worker sat her down and made her truly see the reality of her situation, a 16-year-old single mother with no education and no support. "I held you for 3 days," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. 3 days where you were completely mine. I memorized everything about you. I counted your fingers and your toes. I traced your tiny ears. I whispered promises I knew I couldn't keep." Her voice broke. "And then they came to take you away, and I thought I was going to die. I honestly thought my heart would stop beating, that I couldn't possibly survive losing you. But I did survive. That's the terrible thing about grief. It doesn't actually kill you, even when you want it to. You just keep breathing, keep waking up every morning, carrying this hole in your chest that never quite heals." I reached across the table and took her hand. She gripped it like a lifeline. Do you want to see the room? She asked suddenly. The one I told you about. I nodded, unable to speak. She led me upstairs to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. When she opened the door, my breath caught all over again. The room was painted a soft cream, with white curtains filtering the gray daylight. A twin bed was covered in a beautiful handmade quilt, a garden of flowers in blues, greens, and purples. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with children's books, young adult novels, and classics. But it was the wall opposite the bed that brought fresh tears to my eyes. She had created a timeline of my life using the photographs my mom, Sarah, had sent her over the years. Baby pictures, toddler pictures, school portraits, all arranged chronologically. A visual story of the daughter she'd watched grow up from afar. Beneath each photo, she had written little notes in careful, elegant handwriting. Observations, wishes, expressions of pure love. Under a photo of me at age 3, it said, "You had just learned to blow bubbles. Your face looks so proud." Under my 7-year-old school picture, "Your front teeth are missing. I wonder what the tooth fairy brought you." And then at age 16, "Prom. You look so beautiful. I hope you had a magical night." I walked slowly along the wall, reading each note, seeing my entire life reflected back at me through the eyes of a woman who had never stopped being my mother. A woman who had loved me from a distance with every fiber of her being. When I reached the end of the timeline, there was the most recent photo me at that outdoor concert, smiling at the camera. I turned around and saw Catherine standing in the doorway, watching me. Her expression held so much love, so much pain, and so much hope, it simply took my breath away. In that moment, in that room she had built for me, I finally, truly understood. I was home. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for never forgetting me. Thank you for loving me even when you couldn't be with me." She crossed the room and pulled me into another embrace. We just stood there, surrounded by all the evidence of her devotion, two women trying to bridge a gap that should never have existed. But somehow, miraculously, it was finally beginning to close. We spent the rest of that afternoon curled up on her couch, just talking. It was how I always imagined mothers and daughters were supposed to talk, filling in the 28 years with stories, laughter, and more tears than I could count. She showed me the tape recording she'd mentioned before, pulling out an old cassette player from a closet. She handled the tape like it was made of glass. Made of glass. When she pressed play, I heard her younger voice, trembling and sweet, singing a lullaby I didn't recognize. And underneath it, the tiny sounds of a newborn baby me crying and fussing, completely unaware that I was being documented, being loved, being memorized. "I'm so sorry," she whispered as the tape played. "I'm so sorry I couldn't keep you. I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough or brave enough or old enough to figure out how to make it work." I grabbed her hand and held it tight. "You were 16 years old," I said firmly. "You were a child yourself. You made the best decision you could with the information and resources you had. And you gave me to people who loved me desperately, who gave me a beautiful life. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to be proud of." The gratitude in her eyes was so raw it made my heart ache. "Sarah wrote me a letter once," she said, her voice soft. "About 5 years after the adoption. She told me that you'd asked about me, that you wanted to know why I gave you away. She said she'd explained it the best way she knew how. But she wanted me to know something important, that you were a happy child, a loved child, and that while you were curious about me, you never doubted that you belonged with them. She said she was raising you to understand that love comes in different forms, and that my choice to place you for adoption was an act of love, not an absence of it." Tears blurred my vision. "She told me that too," I managed to say. "She said you loved me enough to let me go." I didn't understand it then, but I think I'm starting to now. Catherine reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my face. The gesture was so maternal, so natural, that it felt like something inside me cracked wide open. "You look so much like her too, you know," she said softly. "Like Sarah. You have my eyes and my coloring, but you have her expressions. That little crinkle between your eyebrows when you're thinking hard. That's pure Sarah. And the way you tilt your head when you re-listening. I've seen that in every photo she sent me. You're a perfect blend of both of us, and that feels right somehow. That feels like exactly how it should be." We ordered pizza for dinner because neither of us could even imagine cooking. We ate it cross-legged on her living room floor, talking about everything and nothing. She wanted to know all about my students, so I told her about Marcus, who insisted he was going to be a dinosaur when he grew up, and Lily, who wrote stories about a princess who solved crimes, and Jackson, who brought me flowers from his mother's garden every single Monday. She told me about the library where she worked, about the children's reading hour she led every Saturday morning. She confessed how being around kids had been both painful and healing, a way to pour her maternal instincts into children who were and her own, because she couldn't have the one child she wanted most. As evening settled into night, a quiet understanding passed between us. Neither of us wanted the day to end. I had planned to drive back to Seattle that evening, but when Catherine asked if I wanted to stay, her voice so fragile and hopeful, I didn't hesitate for a second. "I'd love to," I said, "if you're sure you don't mind." "Mind?" She laughed, and the sound was shaky with emotion. "Emma, I've been waiting 28 years for you to spend the night under my roof. I made up that bed in your room fresh this morning, just in case, just hoping. So I stayed." She lent me pajamas and a toothbrush, and we stayed up late watching old movies and drinking chamomile tea. We were both fighting sleep, not wanting to break the spell of finally being together. When we finally said goodnight around midnight, she hugged me at the door to my room, the room she'd kept for me all these years. "Thank you for being brave enough to call me," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me this gift." I slept in that twin bed under a handmade quilt, surrounded by books she'd chosen for me and photographs of a life she'd watched from a distance. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt completely whole. The emptiness that had followed me through my entire life had finally been filled. It wasn't because Catherine had replaced Sarah, my adoptive mom. It was because I'd finally understood that I didn't have to choose between them. They were both my mothers, they had both loved me, they had both shaped who I became. In the morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and pancakes. I found Catherine in the kitchen, cooking breakfast, and humming that same lullaby from the tape recording. When she saw me standing in the doorway, her face lit up with such pure joy that I had to blink back tears all over again. "Good morning," she said. Those two simple words felt monumental, weighted with all the mornings we'd missed, all the mornings we would never have, and all the mornings that now stretched out before us, full of possibility. We ate breakfast slowly, neither of us wanting to mention that I'd need to leave soon, that real life was waiting for both of us. But eventually, reality intruded. I had to pack up my borrowed pajamas and prepare for the drive back to Seattle. We stood by my car in the late morning sunshine. The rain from yesterday had given way to one of those crystalline autumn days that made everything look sharp and new. Catherine handed me a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much," she said. "Just a little something." Inside was a first edition copy of my favorite children's book, the one I'd told her about the night before. And tucked inside the front cover was a photo. It was a picture of her at 16, holding a tiny bundled-up baby. Me. On the back, she'd written, "My Emma, my beginning and my always." I couldn't speak. I just hugged her, holding on tight. "I'll call you when I get home," I promised. "I'll be waiting," she said, her smile reaching her tear-filled eyes. As I drove away, I saw her standing in the driveway, waving until I turned the corner. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on the little brown package beside me. I was no longer a woman with a missing piece. "It's the quilt from your room," she said. "My grandmother made it for me when I was young, and I've been saving it for you. I want you to have it. I want you to take a piece of this house, this life I built while waiting for you, back with you." I held the package against my chest, feeling the weight of it, the history woven into every stitch. "I'll treasure it," I promised, "and I'll come back. This isn't goodbye, Catherine. This is just the beginning." She smiled through fresh tears. I like the sound of that. "The beginning." She paused, then added quietly, "Would it be okay if I called you sometimes? If we stayed in touch? I don't want to intrude on your life, but I also don't want to go another 28 years only seeing you in photographs." I pulled her into one more hug, holding her tight. "Please call me. Call me whenever you want. Come visit me in Seattle. Let me take you to my school so you can meet my students. Let me introduce you to my friends. I want you in my life, Catherine. Not as a replacement for the mother I lost, but as the mother I found. Is that okay?" "More than okay," she whispered against my shoulder. "More than I ever dreamed possible." As I drove away, watching her get smaller in my rearview mirror until she disappeared, I felt something settle inside me that had been restless and searching for as long as I could remember. I thought about Sarah. about how she'd carried the secret of those photographs and that phone number, building a bridge between my two mothers without ever asking for recognition or praise. I thought about Catherine, 16 years old and heartbroken, making an impossible choice because she loved me more than she loved the idea of keeping me. I thought about all the years I'd spent feeling incomplete, not understanding that sometimes the pieces of ourselves aren't missing, they're just waiting to be discovered. My phone rang through the car speakers as I merged onto the highway, and Catherine's name appeared on the screen. I answered, smiling before she even spoke. "I forgot to tell you something," she said, her voice warm and slightly embarrassed. "When you were born, in those 3 days I had with you, I used to whisper this thing to you every night before you went to sleep. I'd say, you are loved beyond measure, you are wanted beyond words, and wherever you go in this life, you carry my heart with you. I just wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that even though I couldn't raise you, those words were always true. They're still true." I had to pull over to the side of the road because I was crying too hard to see, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. "Say it again," I asked. "Please say it again." And she did, her voice steady and sure, this time speaking words that had waited 28 years to find their way back to me. "You are loved beyond measure, you are wanted beyond words, and wherever you go in this life, you carry my heart with you." "I love you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could question them, before I could wonder if it was too soon or too much. "I know we're just getting to know each other. I know this is all so new, but I love you. I think maybe I always have." "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "I've loved you since the moment I first felt you move inside me. I've loved you every single day of your life. And I'll love you every single day of mine for as long as I have left." We stayed on the phone for another hour, just talking and laughing and making plans for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for all the holidays and ordinary days that stretched out before us. When we finally hung up, I sat in my parked car for a long time, watching the autumn sunlight filter through the trees, feeling the weight of the quilt on the passenger seat beside me, and thinking about the strange, beautiful ways that love finds us, even when we think it's lost forever. I'd spent 28 years looking for something I thought was missing, carrying questions that felt too heavy to bear. But now I understood that nothing had been missing at all. I'd been loved all along by Sarah, who raised me with grace and wisdom and who built secret bridges to keep my story whole. By Catherine, who carried me in her heart even when she couldn't carry me in her arms. By both of them in different ways, in the only ways they knew how. I pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward home, toward my little apartment and my cat and my students and my regular life. But everything looked different now, brighter somehow, as if the world had been waiting for me to find this missing piece before it could show me its true colors. I wasn't a lost child anymore. I wasn't incomplete. I was exactly who I was always meant to be, a daughter twice loved, a bridge between two women who had both given me everything they had to give. A testament to the fierce and complicated and beautiful ways that families are made. And as I drove, I found myself humming that lullaby, the one Catherine had sung to me when I was 3 days old. The melody working its way into my bones like it had been there all along, just waiting for me to remember. Waiting for me to come home. Waiting for me to understand that some stories don't end with goodbye, they just pause, holding their breath until love finds a way to bring everyone back together again. This was my story. This was my beginning. And it was finally, perfectly, beautifully happy.